I thought about asking you to pray for me that in the passage that we're looking at now in Daniel chapter 2, I'm surprised it didn't feature in my dream, but I don't think it did actually feature in my dream. I'm really trying hard to resist every Sunday. Like I told you, my sister challenged me once about not mentioning football every week, and so I've tried to be a bit better about that. But I've mentioned it now, haven't I? But then the other thing is about not mentioning Brexit. I mentioned it already in the prayers, and not mentioning Donald Trump. But as much as I try, these things are real in the world. They are a reality of the world in which we live, just as King Nebuchadnezzar was a reality of the world in which Daniel was living. He had no choice, but he was surrounded by this king surrounded by the king and his power, his system, which meant that he was where he was. It meant he was uprooted from his family and his life in Jerusalem, and it meant that he was working in the way that he did, and that his life was endangered as it was. So we can't ignore these things or avoid them. So the same with Trump, the same with Brexit, whatever your views are on either of those. But to me, I'm not going to mention those any further this morning. But I feel that those things just kept on leaping out to me in what I was reading and what I felt the Spirit was saying to me about this passage, that there were some implications that to me were self-evident. I'm going to allow you to enable you to make up your mind about how those things fit in with what Daniel's experience is and how this story unfolds with Nebuchadnezzar. And we're going to embark on thinking about Daniel and chapter 2. And I want us to put ourselves in the situation of Daniel and his friends and think about what we would do, how we would deal with the situation that we have here. So if we look at chapter 5, we look at chapter 2, verse 5. The king answered the Chaldeans, "This is a public decree. If you do not tell me both the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins." And then that kind of threat is again offered in verse 11 and verse 12. The thing that the king is asking is too difficult, say the wise men. And no one can reveal it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. Because of this, the king flew into a violent rage and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the stakes are pretty high. What would we do in that kind of situation? Dealing with unreasonable behavior on the part of Nebuchadnezzar. Do we think his behavior is reasonable? No? Anybody want to stick their hand up and say they think he's being perfectly reasonable? Oh, go on, somebody do, just for a laugh. No? Okay. Yeah, it's really unreasonable behavior on his part. And I hope we never find ourselves, or have never found ourselves in that kind of situation where our life is in danger in that way. But what we do find all the time is that we are in situations, not where we have to interpret people's dreams, but that might be something that we have attempted to do, or that we have that gift to be able to do. But I think it's more likely that we will find ourselves in situations where we are confronted with somebody who is behaving unreasonably, and that we have to deal with the situation unreasonably. And so what I want us to look at in particular this morning with regard to this story about Daniel is how we might learn from it on how we deal with unreasonable behavior. And so it might be that we need to learn how to deal with unreasonable or bad or harmful or impulsive behavior on the part of people in our family. If you're here with a family member, don't look at them right now. Or it might be that it's to do with somebody who's a neighbour. If you live near somebody, don't look at them, avoid eye contact. It might be that it's to do with somebody in our workplace. It might be to do with somebody where we study. It might be somebody that we just encounter day in, day out. Maybe it's the bus driver, the same bus driver that's always just behaving really unreasonably, putting his foot down on the throttle just when you're on your way to the seat, or just being really inflexible. Or it might even be somebody in church. Again, don't look at anybody at all. I'm going to look this way. So it might be to do with somebody in church even, where we encounter this kind of behavior. It might even be a pastor. Moving on. So, unreasonable behavior. How do we deal with it? Well, in the case of in the case of what Daniel is confronted with, it's a no-win situation for him. I think it might be what we call a double bind for him and the other people, whichever way they go with it. It's caught between a rock and a hard place, whatever words, whatever metaphor we want to use. It's really hard for Daniel and the other wise men to be able to get out of this one, because it seems that they don't have the ability to be able to either interpret the dream or to be able to say what the dream, the actual content of the dream was. It's really, really hard. But, for us, in the kind of unreasonable behavior that we might come across it might be to do with somebody who's bullied us and who continues to bully us. I don't mean as in this kind of physical, it might be that, a physical bullying. It might be some kind of abuse, physical, or all the other kinds of abuse that might go on. Or it might be somebody who's a little bit more subtle about that. And Christians were very good at this, aren't they? Of being passive-aggressive about things, where we don't actually let on that we're really angry and hacked off with somebody, but we just behave in really quite a quietly unreasonable way by not cooperating with people again and again, or just messing them around. Or it might be that somebody's laying demands on us that are very hard to meet, just like Nebuchadnezzar is laying these demands upon Daniel and the other people, which are so hard for them to be able to meet. It might be that we feel like we've been manipulated by people, or that whatever we do, we just can't satisfy what it is that they want us to do. And the thing with Nebuchadnezzar is that he's the king. So that's quite a big deal, being a king. I've never been a king, but I imagine that it is quite a big deal. I guess the closest thing we have to a king is somebody who's finally given up his driving license, it seems. But there's a certain amount of power that goes on with it, and there's a lot of power, absolute power, for Nebuchadnezzar that was there. He had power over Daniel and over the other wise men. And so unreasonable behavior that really hurts, that really counts for us, is where people have power over us. It might not be something as absolute and scary as Nebuchadnezzar, but it may also be something that actually every time we think about that person, every time we think about that situation, it makes us feel nervous, it makes us feel sad, it makes us feel angry, it just unsettles us. So the power thing is important. But let's look at what Daniel does in order to deal with the situation. So the king has his dream, which really troubles him, and then he kind of goes into a bit of a rage about it and demands that all of the wise men and the magicians and the sorcerers and the experts in his community should tell him not only what the dream means, but what it actually was, the content of it. Really, really hard to satisfy. And so then he issues this decree that all of the wise men, they're all got to be executed. The whole lot of them. And we see that the behavior is unreasonable because it's something where Daniel actually queries, what's the hurry? Why such a rush to do this? It's clearly not always the way that Nebuchadnezzar acts. He's being really, really unreasonable and quite impetuous about it. So let's see what Daniel does. In verse 14, it seems that Daniel and the others are not, and his friends are not quite part of the same setup that we have here. It's probably easier for me to read it off here, so I'm going to read it off here as well. Then Daniel responded with prudence and discretion to Arioch. There's two key words for us there, prudence and discretion. The king's chief executioner who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. Daniel acts with prudence and discretion. He uses wisdom. Overall description of what the narrator is telling us here, what the author of the book of Daniel is telling us here, is that he doesn't just rush in. He uses some wisdom, some sensitivity in order to be able to do what he does. Picks up for me what Paul says in Romans in chapter 12. If you read, I recommend any time, any day, read the whole of Romans chapter 12. If you feel down, if you feel that you don't know what to do, how you should live as a Christian, read Romans chapter 12, and it's very, very edifying. So that's a challenge. Every day this week, have a dose, once a day at least, of Romans chapter 12. But it tells us in there that how we need to act with love and kindness, and to just learn how to live with grace and gentleness of living alongside each other. Don't become overcome by evil, but let the way that we behave and the way that we live overcome that. To love people so much in a genuine way, that actually it just drowns out all of that bad stuff. In the same way, it picks up on the thing that Peter says. So we've got Peter and Paul backing this up as being part of what is on the heart of Jesus in chapter 3 and verses 13 to 16. And Peter's saying to the people in a similar situation to Daniel is where they're living in a community where they're not surrounded by other believers. They're surrounded by people that are against them. They're under the threat of execution and persecution. Life is hard for them. And he tells them that they must always give a reason for their faith, but to do that in a way that is disarming, is gentle. To do it with reverence and gentleness. And this is the kind of thing that Daniel does here. He doesn't go rushing in. He uses some tact and diplomacy in the way that he deals with the king. He shows wisdom. He picks up on the way that God would have us do things. Because very often when somebody does something unreasonable to us, our response will be to do something unreasonable to them. If that's how you want to do it, that's how we're going to do it then. And we go for revenge. Second thing is that Daniel asks questions in verse 15. He asked Arioch, the royal official, why is the decree of the king so urgent? And Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. So again, part of this not rushing in is that Daniel finds out a little bit more about it. Sometimes, especially in this day of social media, we can hear somebody sends us something that they've kind of heard that somebody else has said, that somebody else did somewhere else where we don't know where it actually came from, and then the next thing we know that it's gone viral, and then everybody is saying that somebody else is rubbish, and it all just escalates. Or we just do it by word of mouth because somebody heard that somebody outside church said that somebody had done this, and then they need to know about that, and then somebody ought to talk to the minister, but maybe not. So then it goes on and on and on, and then eventually it might come to the minister, and so it goes on. You get the picture. These things get out of hand. So if we take the trouble to find out and ask questions, here we have a model of what we can do by looking at how Daniel behaves. He asks questions about it to establish the facts. He does some research. The third thing is that Daniel has the boldness to trust God. He has the boldness to trust God. So if we look at verse 16. So Daniel went in and requested that the king give him more time and he would tell the king the interpretation. Daniel takes a risk here. He doesn't know, well, we don't have the evidence necessarily that he's backed up by God. He hasn't already, the way it's written, doesn't tell us that he first of all checks with God, can I go in here, will you cover me? He just assumes that God will cover him. That God is on his side. That he knows that what Nebuchadnezzar is doing is wrong. He knows that he has this gift to be able to interpret dreams. So before we get the prayer where Daniel actually asks for God's help in this, he goes in with boldness and confidence to know what it is would be on God's heart about this, to go and ask the king for more time. Sticks his neck out because he knows that God has got his back. Even though it might not end well. But it does end well. Then we see that Daniel works with other people, so he uses resources around him. So in verse 17, we see that Daniel then went to his home and informed his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about what had happened, and informs them that they need to get on their knees and pray. That they and the other wise people, we don't know exactly what happened to the others, but we certainly know what happened to Daniel and his friends, that they would not be victims of this brutal execution. So they took it to God. They trusted in him and they worked together to do that. They stuck together with good people. And then we see that Daniel not only took it to God, but he listened to God and he praises God. If we could just look at verses 18 to 23, and we have this hymn of praise. And he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions with the rest of the wise men of Babylon might not perish. And then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night, and Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, "Blessed be the name of God from age to age, for wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons, deposes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him, and he thanks God that he has been able to solve this problem. Daniel puts God first. He gives the situation to God. It's almost assumed, implicit in the text that we have here, that is what Daniel is about. That is where Daniel is at, that he is close to God. I don't mean that he's God's favorite. I mean that he keeps himself close to God's ways. He sticks with his faithful God. And another thing is that Daniel he happens to be there. He is there in that situation. That's where he finds himself. He might not want to be. It might not be where he's really wanting to be right now. But it might be that for us, when we find ourselves in these situations, which I'm sure that everybody here encounters somebody who behaves unreasonably towards us, maybe in the last, even this year so far, we're bound to have had something where something's come up like that. If not, you are so blessed. Or you've just been hiding for a month. But the fact that we're there, and Daniel just finds himself there in this place, it wasn't of his making that he's there, and he does something with that. He doesn't just think, nope, I'm out of here. He doesn't just say, oh no, well, it's okay, we'll keep our heads down and maybe we won't get executed as well. Or maybe, maybe we should just fight back. But Daniel is in that situation, and he deals with being in that situation. There's a sense of him needing to, being called to do that. And maybe for us, in the difficult situations we find ourselves in, where we're dealing with unreasonable people at work or in our families or in church or wherever it is, that actually we need to acknowledge that actually, okay, I'm here, I need to deal with it. I need to deal with it in a godly way. I need to deal with it in a way where I do pray about it. I need to deal with it in a way where I am sensitive about it, rather than just charging in, which is what I feel that I want to do. But I need to behave like the Christian grown-up here. And be reasonable as I can be. I've told you before about some of our neighbours that we have who we've not always had good relationship with. We've tried, and they haven't always been reasonable with us. We had some issues about wherever we put our wheelie bin. I mean, we're wheeling it in and out, just full at the moment, same like most of us living in Birmingham. But wherever we put it, it wasn't right. There were various other things. We just were living our life, but there were things that just weren't right. And this was becoming really, really intolerable. And, just not good when you're living alongside somebody and it feels bad. And we prayed about it, and then and just continually prayed that the situation might be better. And so then both Isabel and myself, we kind of worked a charm offensive, basically. Is it love bombs? Is that what it's called? Yeah, throwing a love bomb. So where you just kind of just as nice as you can, and offering stuff and offering practical things. You see, Daniel, in the situation that he's in, he offers a practical solution for the king. He gives the king what he wants. So maybe sometimes in our circumstances, that's what we need to do. So there was one day this time last year, when it was really snowy, and I went and cleared the drive. I saw the neighbour coming out and struggling doing it, and went and helped him. And it has, praise God, it's just melted the ice since then. Last night, we had a little party at our house, because Martha was 21 this week, and she had some friends round, and there was an issue over where people might park their cars. So it wasn't my idea, it was Isabel's idea, to go round and talk to the neighbours and say, this is happening, and rather than thinking, well, we'll just park there and we'll see what happens. But we built something up that is good. And they were fine, to the extent that then the neighbour brought round a present for Martha before her party started. And we were just kind of blown away by that act of kindness on their part, remembering where we were just over a year ago in our relationship with them. But by bringing it to God, by realizing that if we do something practical to help, by knowing that God is with us in this, and what God wants is for us to get on together, and there to be a solution to this. And by being as kind and as gentle as we can be, that God can change these things, just as God changes the situation with Daniel, and Daniel is able to solve what the mystery of the dream is, and to save lives. Can we do that? With those unreasonable situations that we find ourselves in? So this week, we're reading Romans 12 every day, and we're also dealing with unreasonable behavior the Daniel way. Amen? Okay. Let's sing. We're going to sing.